Namaskar. I would begin by thanking the Teaching Learning Center, Ramanujan College, for providing me with this opportunity to speak on the role of ethics in life sciences. So let me begin by asking the very basic question that what do we mean when we say ethics? What does the word ethic mean? So as we know, the term ethics is derived from the Greek word ethos, which means customs or behavior. So ethic has to do with morality, the right and the wrong. It defines the rules and the code of conduct in respect to a particular action by a particular group or a culture. So Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, was the first one to use the concept of ethics to discuss the philosophical questions related to daily life. The word ethics is often used interchangeably with morals. However, ethics is more personal and it provides the tools and arguments for critically analyzing morals. When we say that something is right, why is it right? This analysis can be done with the help of ethical arguments. So there are different branches of ethics, important ones being descriptive ethics, wherein we just describe the morals or behavior of people. Then we have normative ethics. So normative ethics tells us how people should behave. So it basically passes a judgment. It basically tells us a way of behavior. And then we have analytical ethics, which is when we analyze the behavior. So these are the three very important branches of ethics. And we can understand this with the help of this example. So the sentence that people tend to make decisions which bring pleasure or avoid pain. So here we are describing. So it's a simple observation about the behavior of people. So how do people behave? They behave in a way that brings them pleasure or which helps them in avoiding pain. Now the next sentence is the moral decision is that which enhances well-being and limits suffering. So in this sentence, we are trying to derive a conclusion to create a moral standard. And the last one is analytical, in which we say that morality is simply a system for helping humans stay happy and alive. So in this, we are drawing a broad conclusion about morality, about the purpose of morals. Now, now, as I told you, the normative ethics tells us about the code of conduct. So for determining ethical behavior, that what is right or what is wrong, in normative ethics, there are three prominent approaches. And these approaches are also known as ethical theories. So there can be the utilitarian ethics, there can be deontology, there are natural ethics. It is not limited to these three ethics. There are other theories also, but these are the major theories. So when a decision is based on what benefits the majority of the people, it is known as a utilitarian ethics. This can be basically stated as the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So here the decision or action is based on consequences. And hence, this is also termed as consequential ethical theory. An example of this can be when the government advocates the use of mass vaccination. So, for example, we just were in this pandemic and the government said that everybody should get vaccinated. So it is believed that so this falls under this utilitarian ethics. So according to the utilitarian ethics, this is ethical. Why? Because this action would lead, as a consequence of this action, a majority of people would benefit. Now, deontology, on the other hand, falls in the non-consequential ethics, falls in the realm of non-consequential ethics, which means that ethical decision is not dependent on the consequence. Rather, it is dependent upon duties, values, belief. So it is our duty to respect human life and to treat it with dignity. Now, the basic difference of these two theories that I just now stated can be understood with an example, with a very classical example, of course. So suppose there are four patients. Patient A needs a kidney, patient B needs a lung, patient C needs a liver, and patient D needs a heart. Now, for example, if I want to act in a way that helps the majority of the people, my according to the utilitarian theory, the ethical thing to do would be to kill one of the patient so that his or her organ could be given to the rest of the three, and the three patients can live a good life. So according to the utilitarian theory, this is a totally ethical way of acting. But according to deontology, which advocates that we should, whatever is the consequence is not important, we should act according to what is our duty. So our duty is respect towards human life. So human life. So here in this case, according to the deontology, if I kill one person, so I am not respecting his life. So according to the deontology, this would be an example of unethical behavior. So now I come to the natural law ethics. This theory is based on natural human good, that is life, procreation, knowledge, reason, sociability. In this case, the decisions we take should never destroy the should never destroy the natural good. However, in practical life, there can be situation where there's a conflict in virtues. Now, example of where natural law of ethics is applied. So take the example of abortion. So even if the mother's life is at stake, there's a complicated situation, and if there's no abortion, the mother would die. But according to the natural law of ethics, it would be unethical to kill the embryo, or it will be unethical to conduct a abortion. Similarly, euthanasia is another example. Even if the patient is suffering and the patient has no hopes of recovery, still killing that patient would be against the natural laws. So all these theories have their own pros and cons. The greatest difficulty in the utilitarian theory is that in this case, many times there are situations when we do not know the consequence. So in that case, it becomes difficult to take a decision according to this ethical theory. So now, after discussing the theories of ethical theories, let me ask a question. Are ethics universal? So let us try to understand this with the help of an incident described by Herodotus. There was a Persian king, King Darius, who used to travel a lot. And once he summoned some Greeks to his court, and he asked them that if their fathers were dead, if their parents were dead, would they, and if these people are given money, would they like to eat the dead bodies of their fathers? The Greeks, who normally cremate their dead people, they were totally shocked upon hearing this, and they said that even if they are paid any amount of money, they would never ever eat the dead bodies of their fathers. Later, in the presence of the Greeks and through an interpreter, King Darius asked the Calathians, who are an Indian tribe, that would they consider cremating the dead body of their parents? Again, this shocked them as they were not used to burning the dead bodies. So they uttered a cry of horror and forbade him to even mention such a dreadful thing. So this incident clearly shows that ethics is not universal. Rather, there's something called cultural relativism. That means ethics is relative and it depends upon the place, time, situation, etc. So now, after coming to this conclusion that ethics is not universal, an evident question is that then is there a conflict between science and ethics? Because science is considered to be impersonal, objective, without values, and ethics is often seen as the counterpart of science, as something personal and something subjective. In fact, in the early 19th century, when many academic institutes were set up and research was being advocated quite a lot, the scientists believed that science had nothing to do with ethics and with the outcomes. Science has nothing to do with the ethics and the outcome, with practicality or its application. The quest of knowledge was considered as an end to itself. This was termed as pure research. However, with the World War II, more accountability was demanded of scientific researchers. So there were many incidences that took place, which brought about a change in the attitude of people. So I would be discussing some of them now, so that maybe you have heard most of them. But all these all these incidents basically started discussions around weapons, then around environmental issues in the 1970s to 1980s. And later on, the discussions are more, and even now, the discussions are more around the biological research and application. So what are these issues that I'm talking about? So the first was, of course, the experiments that were being done by the Nazi doctors during the World War II. In this, during the Second World War, Second World War, there were completely unethical and horrendous experiments that were carried out by the German doctors, leading to the death and disfigurement or permanent disability of many of the participants. The second incident that I would like to bring your attention to was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. In the 1932, the Public Health Service and the Tuskegee Institute began to record the natural history of syphilis in 600 black males. And this study continued for around 40 years. And the majority of the participants were poor and illiterate, and they belonged to the Alabama county. They were encouraged to participate in the study by promising them meals on the test days, free medical care, and even burial insurance. However, they were not told what the study was all about. And even in 1947, when penicillin was discovered and penicillin was being used for the treatment of syphilis, it was not given to these men. So here, this was a total unethical condition where the treatment was withheld from a group of people who could have benefited. Another equally shocking experiment was the Willowbrook experiment. This was conducted by Dr. Krugman, who was studying hepatitis. And this continued from 1956 to 1971. So Willowbrook State School was an institute for the mentally retarded children. These children were made to be participants in this research study, where Dr. Krugman injected the antibodies into some of these students. And these children, they were mentally retarded. They did not have the capability to understand or to give consent. So healthy children were administered with antibodies without their knowledge. And moreover, the new patients were recruited by telling the patient that the facility was overcrowded and their child would be accepted only if they participated in the study. Another equally shocking incident was of DDT. So as we all know, the DDT was invented in 1873 and had been known in the early days of the synthetic organic chemistry. However, its use as an insecticide was discovered in 1939 by the Swiss chemist Paul Hermann Muller. And he in fact received the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for this discovery. So this chemical was extensively used during World War II by the American soldiers to fight off various insect-borne diseases in the third world countries such as malaria and typhus. After the war was over, this continued to be used against malaria, but soon it started being used as an agricultural insecticides, offering a solution to the issue of feeding the rapidly increasing global population. So it seemed harmless to human, and they said that the agriculture product could be increased quite a lot. In 1962, Rachel Carson published her book Silent Spring, which clearly pointed out that DDT was playing havoc with wildlife and environment, including some harms to the human through the food chain. It was also showing some signs of causing cancer. And soon the US Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, swung into action and banned it in 1972. But interestingly, this continued to be produced for 10, 20, 30 years, and it was continuously supplied to the Asian countries. The US government closed eyes to the production, and the Montrose Chemical Corporation, which was making it, carried on earning profits on global level, saving the US environment, wildlife, and human life, whereas harming life elsewhere. So these were certain incidences which basically jolted the scientific community as well as the society. From these examples, we can clearly comprehend that scientific research is also committed to values, and often there would be questions of right and wrong, and also to what extent experimentation can be allowed, such as the use of animals or human beings in scientific experiment. Also, how the product is being made, what is its impact on the society, on the environment. So these are questions that would be asked in scientific research and specifically in life science research. Need to adhere to ethical norms in life sciences research. Firstly, ethics promotes the basic principle of robust research, such as knowledge, truth, avoidance of error by prohibiting falsification, fabrication, or misinterpretation of research data. Secondly, research in life sciences many times is collaborative work, as we saw in case of the pandemic now, that many countries, many research labs were collaborating with each other, sharing data so that the vaccine could be, could be made in a very short duration. So there are certain basic ethics that are required for collaborative work, such as accountability, mutual respect, and fairness, trust. Then ethical norms also ensure the accountability of the researchers and protects humans as well as the animals, and make sure that the researchers are answerable to the public. As we know that research is mostly publicly funded. So that means that research, we cannot isolate these two things. We cannot isolate research from the society. Research has to be answerable to the society, to the public. Also, when the research is robust, when we adhere to the above three discussed points, it helps in building public support because it ensures that ethical behavior in research in life science, ensures quality and integrity of research. So that builds public support. And this public support is essential so that funding is provided to research. So all these are reasons that it is very important that we understand the role of ethics in research. As giant strides are being made in the field of life sciences, people on one hand have been awed, and on the other hand, they have been horrified. Time and again, the question of control has been raised, because most of these cutting edge technologies that are, have far reaching effect on human beings can also be used for destructive purposes. So these dual use technologies have been a threat to mankind as well as the entire planet. So initially people were overawed with scientific discovery, but later on, due to the misconduct in the late 80s and 90s, the scientific community lost trust of the public. This led to the formation of the Office of Scientific Integrity in 1989, which tried to investigate the research misconduct such as falsification, plagiarism, fabrication. However, the researchers vehemently opposed this, and they felt that this was not the correct way of ensuring scientific integrity. So then the Office of Research Integrity was set up to strengthen research integrity by educating about ethics and ensuring responsible conduct. So this actually identified 7 core areas where responsible conduct of research was essential. So one of them being how the data was acquired, how it was managed, how it is being shared, the ownership of the data, who owns the data. Also, ethical behavior is required in the mentor and trainee relationship, in the publication practices, about plagiarism, then there's peer review, then collaborative science, human subjects, how far experimentation on humans should be allowed, then research involving animals, research misconduct, conflict of interest, and commitment. So when we talk about ethical issues in life science, so now let me again get back to the main theme. So when we are talking about ethical issues in life science, we basically refer to the moral, legal, social, and political issues related to biological system, including clinical research, biomedical research, and life science technologies. Many a times bioethics is many a times people think that bioethics is just confined to medicines, to medical practice, but actually it is related to research in any aspects of life science. So bioethics, there is 3 level of involvement. Ethics in life sciences is involved at 3 levels. First is that the theoretical and practical aspects, then the legal and the policy aspects, and lastly is the clinical ethics. According to Michael Bales, he says that there are 3 areas where the scientists are responsible. So one of them is that the scientist is responsible to the employer or to the client. Second is responsibility to the third party. And third is to the profession, so that the respect for the profession is maintained. Let us now look at the history of bioethics. So the origin of bioethics dates back to the drafting of the Nuremberg Code, which was based on the Nazi trials conducted by the Nazi doctors in Nuremberg. So the American judiciaries to prosecute the involved doctors generated the Nuremberg Code, which constituted 10 principles to guide scientific or medical research, such as voluntary consent, that before experimentation on human, consent has to be taken from the participant, and that consent should be voluntary. They should not be given any incentive, neither should they be threatened in any ways. In the experiments, the benefits should outweigh the risk. There should be more benefits than risks involved. And all experiments that are to be conducted on humans should be first conducted on animals. Also, there should be means so that the suffering is avoided, no intentional death or disability. The subjects should be free to stop the experimentation at any stage that they want to, or they could withdraw from the experiment. The investigator should be qualified for the experiments that they are carrying out. And in case that they realize that some harm it would be caused due to the experiments, it should be stopped in that case. Although this was the first code that was given, it faced many disadvantages and many flaws. One of them was that it was believed that the code was plagiarized because it was based, code was plagiarized because it was based on, now let us discuss about the history of bioethics. So the origin of bioethics dates back to the drafting of the Nuremberg Code. These were based on the Nazi trials that were conducted. The American judiciary was appointed to prosecute the doctors who were involved in carrying out the experiments, Nazi doctors who were involved in carrying out the experiments during the World War II. So a code was set up which constituted 10 principles to guide the scientific or medical research. They are one of the most important one is the voluntary consent, that the participant should have provided consent without any kind of force or without being unaware of the consequences. So it should be an informed consent. Second, the experiments should be such that whatever benefits that we are anticipating should be much more than the risks that are involved. Also, any experiments that would be carried out on humans should be first carried out in animals. There should be means to avoid suffering while the experiment is going on. There should be no intentional death or disability. Also, a very important clause that was added was that the participant should be free to withdraw or to withdraw from the experiment or to stop being a part of the study as and when they feel like it. Whenever they feel that they are not comfortable with it, they should be able to stop it. There should be qualified investigators who are carrying out the experiments. Also, in case that the investigators realize that some harm might be caused, the experiment should be stopped. However, the Nuremberg Code faced a lot of criticism. One of them being a very important one being that it was plagiarized since it was adopted from the 1931 German guidelines on human experimentation. So subsequently, the World Medical Association, which was established during the World War II, developed the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964. The declaration has been amended various times after that, 7 times, and the current version of the declaration was published in 2030. The Declaration of Helsinki is a statement of the ethical principles for human scientific research, including human data and materials, which is available in 8 languages. So how are these two codes different? While the Nuremberg Code basically is about the rights of the participants, the DOH or the Declaration of Helsinki focuses on the physician's obligations to the research participants. In 1974, the National Research Act was signed and efforts were made to identify the ethical principles in conduct of biomedical and behavioral research involving humans. Consequently, in 1976, the Commission summoned a 4-day meeting in Belmont Convention Center, Smithsonian Institute, and they created a report on basic research ethical guidelines called the Belmont Report. The report outlines 3 basic principles: respect for person, beneficence, and justice. This was followed by the principles of biomedical ethics. So in 1975, Beauchamp and Childress published their book, Principles of Biomedical Ethics, which elaborates 4 essential ethical principles of biomedical research: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. Since the moral decision-making and actions are based on these 4 ethical principles, instead of a theoretical model, these are described as ethical principles, which are currently one of the most popular tool of analyzing biomedical research. The four principles that are referred to here are non-hierarchical. That means that none of them is more important than the others. It is the duty of a researcher to uphold each of these principles. However, in actual situation, one must balance the demands of these principles by determining which carries more weight in that particular case. So the principles to be applied while taking a decision is dependent upon the case. It is case variable. So now let us look at these principles one by one. So the first principle is respect for autonomy or the autonomy. This implies that patient's decision is to be respected. So the patient, it believes that the patient has the capacity to act intentionally with understanding. So it is giving due respect to the patient's understanding. And it believes that the patient can take a decision without any controlling influences. However, in case of a vulnerable minor child, the principle of avoiding the harm of death and the principle of providing medical benefit that can restore the child to health and life would be given precedence over the autonomy of the child's parents as surrogate decision maker. A very good example to understand this is the case of the Jehovah's Witnesses. So the Jehovah's Witness is a cult who have the belief that it is wrong to accept blood transfusion. So even in a life-threatening situation, they would not like to have a blood transfusion. So when there is a life-threatening situation where the blood transfusion can save the patient, save the life of the patient has to be informed. The consequences of refusing a blood transfusion must be made clear to the patient at the risk of dying from blood loss. So at this point, the physician's or the doctor's duty is to tell the patient that he might even lose his life and the exact situation. Desiring to benefit the patient, the physician may strongly recommend a blood transfusion because he might believe that it would be more beneficial for the patient. However, he cannot ethically take that decision for him. He has to give the right of decision to the parents, to the patient, while properly and compassionately informing him of the consequences of his decision. And once the patient chooses whether to refuse the blood transfusion and give priority to his or her religious convictions, even to the point of accepting death, the doctor has to respect this. Throughout this, the communication must be compassionate and respectful of the patient's unique values, even if they differ from the standard goals of biomedicine, which is to save life. The second principle is the principle of non-maleficence, such as the case of a patient dying of intestinal carcinoma. Let us take this example to understand this principle. So basically, this principle says that in no case we have to harm a patient either intentionally or due to carelessness. But now let us take the case of the patient dying of painful intestinal carcinoma, and the patient chooses to forego CPR in the event of cardiac or respiratory arrest, or the patient might choose to forego life-sustaining technology such as dialysis or respirator. The reason for such a choice is based on the belief of the patient that prolonged living with a painful and debilitating condition is worse than death, a greater harm. So this is many times the case when the patient might not want to go ahead with the treatment because he believes that the treatment is of no use to him and it would just prolong his life of suffering. Now, the principle of double effect is that A typical example might be the question as to how to best treat a pregnant woman newly diagnosed with the cancer of the uterus. The usual treatment, that is removal of the uterus, is considered a life-saving process, life-saving treatment. However, this procedure would result in the death of the fetus. Now, what action is morally allowable or what is our duty? It is argued in this case that the woman has the right to self-defense and the action of hysterectomy is aimed at defending and preserving her life. So we say that by killing the fetus, by the death of the fetus, we are actually saving the life of the woman. The foreseeable unintended consequence, though undesired, is the death of the fetus. Now, there are four conditions that usually apply to the principle of double effect. First, the nature of the act. The action itself must not be intrinsically wrong. It must be good or at least morally neutral act. Second, the agent's intention. The agent intends only the good effect, not the bad effect, even though it is foreseen. Third, the distinction between means and effects. The bad effects must not be the means of the good effect. And proportionality between the good effect and the bad effect. The good effect must outweigh the evil that is permitted. In other words, the bad effect. So taking these into consideration, we can then make a decision in case of principle of double effect. So now the question is, if we consider these four conditions, would it become easier to take a decision that if by removing the uterus in case of a woman who is pregnant but has cancer, if it is saving the life, the nature of the act, the action itself must not be intrinsically wrong. So here in this case, the action is not intrinsically wrong, because in this case, we are trying to save the woman's life. The agent intends only the good effect. So the physician is intending only on saving the life of the woman by removing the uterus, which has a tumor in it. So all these things help us to take the decision. Now let us look at the third principle, the principle of beneficence. The ordinary meaning of this principle is that healthcare providers have a duty to be of benefit to the patient as well as to take positive steps to prevent and to remove harm from the patient. The goal of benefit can be applied both to individual patients and to the good of society as a whole. For example, the good health of a particular patient is the appropriate goal of medicine, and the prevention of disease through research and the employment of vaccine is the same goal expanded to the population at large. Now, the physician's opinion is in the best interest of the patient without consulting the patient or by overriding the patient's wishes is considered as paternalistic behavior. The most clear-cut case of justifies paternalism is seen in the treatment of suicidal patients who are clear and present danger to themselves. Here, the duty of beneficence requires that the physician intervene on the behalf of saving the patient's life or placing the patient in a protective environment. So here, the principle of autonomy would actually tell that the patient has the autonomy to take his life, but the principle of beneficence now comes into the category of paternalistic, wherein the physician is taking the decision without consulting the patient or by overriding the patient's wish. So in this case, he is acting according to the belief that the patient is compromised and he cannot act in his own best interest at this moment. Now, the last principle is the principle of justice. The ethical principle of justice is a complex ethical principle and it ranges from fair treatment of each individual to equitable allocation of healthcare benefits and opportunities. So on one hand, it ensures that each person qualifies for the same kind of treatment. And on the other hand, it also ensures that the benefits and opportunities, such as of healthcare benefits, should be allocated equally among the population. So, for example, in an educational institute, if we allow the teachers to smoke in the classroom, but at the same time, we prohibit the students from smoking, saying that it is bad for their health or it is bad for their friend's health, it would be against the principle of justice, where every person should be treated equally. Similarly, if a healthcare practitioner has an appointment with the patient A, but then suddenly his colleague B comes in, who is his, and since he is a colleague, so the doctor says that, okay, you first come in, I'm going to give you the appointment prior to patient A. Then this is again a case of, this is again unethical according to the principle of justice, because here both the patients are not being treated equally. Now, as far as benefits and opportunities are concerned, the vaccination program that happened during the pandemic provides a very good example. So in this case, it was first decided that every individual in the country would first get their first dose of vaccine, and only then the second dose would be administered. Hence, it ensured equal benefits and opportunities to everyone. So with these four principles, it would be now easier to understand the various incidences or the various bioethical issues that lie at the heart of life sciences. In the next section, I would discuss some of these very important ethical issues concerned with life sciences. Thank you.